What is going on, my people? I think we are live on this little thing called YouTube. It's owned by Google. And Three and Out Podcast. I'm John Middlecoff. Under the Volume, run by this guy named Colin Coward. You might have heard of him. Three and Out Podcast can also be found on the Volume Network. Go subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. And we're going to do this every Monday and every Thursday. Do a couple segments from the podcast. We're just going to be live on YouTube. So that's what we're doing now. Let's rock and roll, baby. Just got to get a little water going through the pipes, loosen up these vocal cords, and dive into some takes. Well, I hit on this on Tuesday's show about my thoughts on Urban Meyer and everything that had gone viral of his, hanging out with chicks and boosters at Ohio State or whatever. I don't even know. I don't really care who he was with, but more information came out. He didn't fly home with the team. And my whole take was, I don't care that he had cocktails. And I think it would be naive to think that coaches don't go out and have cocktails. And I also thought that I was a little uncomfortable. And I saw this a lot on Twitter, like, what would his wife think? Anyone who assumes, what's the thing with assuming? You make an ass out of you and me. I never assume anything with a marriage or a relationship. And to think that the richest people in this country have normal relationships, like me and you would be floored. I mean, when I worked in the NFL, some of the things I heard, I was like, whoa. So listen, and I think this works all over society, not just in the NFL. I never judge people's marriages, their relationships. I truly do not give a shit what people do. But so my take was like, I did think it was a little, the reaction was kind of crazy to me. But the reaction happened. And ultimately, Urban had to apologize. Shad Khan had to come out with a statement. I couldn't figure out if it was real or not because I was getting a lot of statements on my social media times within a deep drive by Castellanos to 4-0 ball game Reds. But I do think he released a statement saying that he was pissed off. And here's what I will not argue. One, I am not an Urban Meyer defender when he came into the NFL. I thought it was a bad hire. I didn't think it made much sense. I think he's over his head. I think his coaching staff's terrible. I think he is an egomaniac that was fantastic for college when he could overpower and bulldoze everyone in his way. He dominated in that realm. This is different because you can't bulldoze your superiors. Like your AD in college works for you, basically, when you're someone of Urban Meyer stature. Nick Saban answers to nobody. Urban answered to nobody. Pete Carroll answered to nobody. That is not the case in the NFL. You answer to the guy cutting your check because it's not a department. It's not a booster club. It's one human being. It's Shad Khan. Now, he's been a terrible owner. And he runs a clown franchise. Let's face it. The Jacksonville Jags feel like a team that you would see in a movie. One of the shitty teams in a movie. Like, I don't take the franchise seriously. But they paid him a lot of money. And here's where I will, because I got some texts from buddies in the NFL that were like, I hear what you're saying about the moral superiority of everyone getting on their, high horse and pounding their chest. It's like anyone who does that, I always think has more skeletons in the closet than most. But in the NFL, distractions, and in football in general, distractions are things that coaches and franchises want to avoid at all costs. And it can't be argued that he created a huge distraction for his team when they were already terrible. And he's already done several things that have made us scratch our head, right? Hell, in the draft, they drafted a running back in the first round, and they immediately moved him to receiver when one of the best players on their team was a running back from last year, James Robinson. But that's a football thing. He had hired the strength coach from Iowa, who they immediately had to fire. It's like Urban, he just doesn't have a great feel for the way the league works. This is true private sector business. In college, I've always said it's not a normal industry because in no normal business would you have all these sports that don't make a penny and get subsidized by football and basketball. Where in football, only one thing makes money, and that's the football team. And that pays for everything. And the league is very lucrative, and it makes a ton of cash. Well, Urban Meyer, once he has the thing that happened over the weekend and all the apologies have to come out, and Mike Silver comes out with a tweet thread about the players lost respect for him. And I said this from the jump. Like even Jim Harbaugh or Pete Carroll, who had success in college and then went to Seattle and the 49ers. Those guys had NFL backgrounds. Pete Carroll had been a head coach for multiple NFL teams. Jim Harbaugh played in the league for 15 years and then got his coaching start for Al Davis. So like Jim Harbaugh knew what it was like to be around NFL players while they were in the NFL. Pete Carroll had coached NFL players, even though the economics were probably a little bit different in the late 90s than they were when he came back in 2010. But he understood the landscape of the league. Urban Meyer never coached a day in his life in the league. And now it feels like, if I know this, if you put yourself in the owner's shoes, you'd go, 3 people I never, ever want to worry about. That would be my head coach, my general manager, and my quarterback. Now, I don't mean that those guys can't make mistakes football-wise, right? You can draft the wrong player. You can make the wrong call on third down. You can throw an interception. But I never, ever want to have to deal with, my GM got a DUI. My head coach is trending on social media. My quarterback is, has alleged 57 masseuses are coming after him for sexual assault. That's a problem. Sometimes you have to deal with it with a wide receiver, with a defensive lineman, with the quarterback, the coach, and the general manager. I never, ever want to think about it. And right now, Urban Meyer is a major problem for the Jags because he's a huge distraction. He's a walking distraction at the moment. And the main problem, if you are going to be a distraction, you better be winning. Because at the end of the day, winning band-aids everything in pro sports, right? You win, it's like, whatever. We'll just deal with that crap later. But they're not only not winning, they're not equipped to win because their roster sucks, and they're not going to win this year. I mean, they might win 2 games. So I saw Florio just had a headline, like, will Urban survive the season? Now, if you're Shad Khan, you could afford, let's just hypothetically say they gave him 5 years, $60 million, right? Like $12 million a year or something. You could pay him the $12 million, or not the $12 million, but like the $48 million after this year to go away. Do you want to do that? Of course you do not. But money to these guys, money's all relative. It's just a line item. So they could pay him to go away. I do think they're in a tough spot because you have, in theory, your franchise on the squad in Trevor Lawrence. And I saw this way back in the day, different circumstances with Alex Smith. Now, Trevor Lawrence should be a way better player than Alex Smith. He's more physically gifted. But the Alex Smith, Aaron Rodgers draft, Alex came to the 49ers. They had Mike Nolan, who we all know is one of the biggest clown shows we've ever seen. And then after Mike Nolan got fired, they got Mike Singletary. So for about 4 or 5 years, Alex Smith was in quarterback prison, right? Like his organization was a clown show. His team was a joke. His coaching situation was a joke. The ownership was the whole thing. And it's very, very hard to overcome that. Most quarterbacks get destroyed and aren't able to overcome that. Now, with the Jags, if you're, Shad Khan, you go, well, I do have a GM, Trent Baalke, who's been a part of some weird stuff, but he did have some good drafts, and he was a part of building a team that made several conference championships and a Super Bowl. I have the young quarterback who is zero worry for me, and I don't even have to think about it. Then I have this coach who might not really be a good coach relative to the NFL. 2, is causing problems now. He's got several problems. Do I want to deal with this headache? I wonder if we can talk to the point. Now, listen, men have big egos. No one's just going to be like, hey, man, I'll quit. You don't have to pay me my $48 million. I doubt that's going to happen. But can you start kind of getting the ball rolling to force him out? It's a tough spot for this franchise. But Urban Meyer, again, I do not care. Like you would be crazy to think that coaches, after wins and definitely losses, don't go places to have cocktails. Now, do they do it discreetly? Do they do it in places, in VIP rooms? Do they do it in private parties? Probably. And I think Urban is he's 60 years old. So it's not like, he's only 37. Like if this would have happened to Sean McVay 3 or 4 years ago, we'd be like, well, he's a little young. He's a little green. That ain't Urban Meyer. So I am not acting like he deserves to, keep his job. I never would have hired him. I think he's completely over his head. This is not going to work. No chance. Like, I would bet the farm against this working. I just think that we're on the trajectory now, and the avalanche is rolling down the hill. It's gonna end ugly because I do not see Urban just tapping out. I can't see it. Now, I think if you're Shad Khan, what you would really hope for is, these buyouts. Even though I've always been confused, why would a college have to pay a buyout, separate industries to get Urban Meyer? But what if you could convince Urban just go back to college? And I saw someone put it out there. Brett McMurphy, who covers college football, said he polled a bunch of ADs, and it was like less than 40% of the ADs said he's untouchable. I'm calling bullshit. If Urban Meyer, beside probably Alabama and Georgia, maybe Oregon, but even like Urban's a way better coach than Mario, it'd be a short list. If Urban Meyer wanted to go to those schools would hire him. Now, I've heard before that USC, the president, who is a woman, has told people she would not hire Urban Meyer, everything that happened at Ohio State. But I do think that that programs would be interested in the guy because that's where he belongs. Sunday, clearly over his head. Talk about ownership in the NFL. We saw a move this week. I think the new move by NFL teams is when you have a good player. The Raiders did this with Rodney Hudson. The Patriots clearly did this with Stephon Gilmore. You leak out in the morning because the way it works is the waiver wire comes out at 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific. So if at like 7 a.m. you leak out, we are going to release a player, the teams, they all have little interns. Hell, I mean, all these GMs are on Twitter. They see, whoa, this guy is going to get released. Immediately, you call the team and be like, hey, because if you have, by this time, now it's what week are we in? Week 4? We're going into week 5. The waiver wire resets. For the first 4 weeks, it's based on the draft order. So the Jags would have the number 1 pick and so on. But once you get to week going into this week, it resets based on records. So if you're a team like the Carolina Panthers, who had a really, really high claim order originally because you were drafting high in the draft, what were they, 8th? You're now way farther down because you're 3-1. So if you want to get a Stephon Gilmore, you would have no chance to claim him. And there are also other variables, salary cap. You have to be able to take on his salary. They called immediately and said, hey, we trade for you. And a lot of teams, like this notion is like, why didn't my team trade for him? Well, a lot of teams don't have the salary cap space to take him. But David Tepper paid $2.2 billion in cash for the team. $2.2 billion in cash for the team. I think you see it right now with the housing market. If you look at all these different suburbs, the suburbs all over America, houses have gone up 50, 100, 200%, right? A home 3 years ago that was $500,000 is now $1.4 million. A home 2 years ago that was $1.2 million is now $2.7 million. Housing prices are through the fucking roof. It's crazy. So think if you go to one of these suburbs and you pay $2.5 million for a home. It's a lot of money. And people probably listen to this like, Jesus, John, how much money are we talking? Depends where you live, right? Maybe that expensive house is 1.2. But there are going to be people in that community. Hell, I see it in the Bay Area where houses are so inflated, it's out of control. I had a buddy that just bought like a $2.8 million house. It was a complete teardown. But there are people in that neighborhood that paid like $300,000 30 years ago and still live in the neighborhood. So you come into the neighborhood and it's just human nature. You're like, well, I just made you a lot of money. Like, you should be kind of nice to me. I helped just immediately put equity by resetting the market in this area. And I noticed that, like, if you're David Tepper and you pay all this money for a franchise, the NFL is owned by a ton of families who have been in the league for 30, 40, 50 years. Hell, some of them, the Bears and the Giants, way longer than that. They obviously didn't pay that much money for the team. And some of these franchises have owners whose net worth is entirely tied to the franchise. And I'm not taking anything away. At one point in time, they paid a lot, even if it was like in the 40s. If you paid $5 million for the franchise, relative to that time, was a boatload of money, was a boatload of cash. So you benefit from making a good investment. But no one ever thought, in 60, 70 years, you're going to be one of the richest people in America because you own this team. So David Tepper comes in. He's already numb to money. He just paid. These people could never imagine. They've never had that type of money, paying that type cash for a franchise. So he comes in very, very aggressive. And if you look at what he's done from the jump, it's been really, really impressive. Like, it's pretty clear he's a high-level owner. I was watching Coward this morning. He was talking about it, and I wrote the same thing down last night because I was thinking once they made the trade, look at Steve Ballmer. He's come into the Clippers, who had a historically cheap owner, a guy that refused to pay money. And the irony is what was his name? I'm forgetting the old Clippers. Oh, Donald Sterling. He actually had a bunch of money because he was a slumlord in LA, owned a ton of real estate. He just refused to spend it on the basketball team. Well, these new owners that come into basketball and they come into football, hell, even Jimmy Haslam, who was an awful owner the first 4 or 5 years of owning that team, he was a big money guy. Now, did he do it shady with Flying J and some of the trucking companies? Yeah, it's debatable. But he never had an issue of just paying coaches to go away. Like, oh, this guy failed. Now, you could argue he was hiring the wrong guys, and he was consistently. But the moment that guy sucked, the moment the GM was a clown, he would just pay them off. Like, go away. And he was running through them at rapid fire. But it didn't matter to him because the money, which is a ton of money, when you pay someone $20, $30, $40 million to go away, if you're listening to this, or me, like, you just say those numbers, it's like, God, that's a lot of money. But to these guys, it's just a line item. And to David Tepper, who's worth over $10 billion, making moves and being aggressive is something that he naturally did in the finance world. And he comes into it like money to him, he's numb to it all. Can you imagine paying, I don't care how much you're worth, giving someone cash, $2.2 billion? Like, that's a lot of money. And then think of what he does. He goes and gets Matt Rule, who, it's kind of crazy, but Baylor was paying him like $8 million. So Matt Rule, could play hard to get a little bit. David Tepper's like, how much is it going to cost? Oh, $72 million? Oh, here's the money. Here's the check. Oh, we want to get this guy from Seattle? Okay, we'll buy him too. And Ballmer did the same thing. He got, I guess Doc Rivers was already there, but bought Ty Lue, got Kawhi Leonard, goes and makes a trade for Paul George. These guys are naturally very aggressive, and they have no problem paying huge taxes. In the NBA, you get taxed if you go over the salary cap. In the NFL, you have to stay under the cap because the hard cap. But where you can take advantage of it is paying coaches, paying the front office. And when you see this trade for Stephon Gilmore, it's a little baseball-y. Now, they only gave up a 6th-round pick, so even if the guy leaves at the end of the year, who cares? But I think a lot of teams, even if they had the salary cap space, because there is a question. Gilmore tore his quad last year. He's a man-to-man corner who hangs his hat on elite athleticism. So, like Darrelle Revis, Deion Sanders, a true elite athlete, Jalen Ramsey, you put on a star wide receiver, and he mirrors him the entire game. Well, to do that, your athleticism, your explosiveness, your speed has to be top-notch. So there's a question. Maybe he lost that when he tears his quad. We're going to find out whenever he comes off PUP. But the mindset in Carolina, and then think about the way they got their quarterback, Sam Darnold, who I think is probably a little overhyped right now, but is still playing pretty good. Like, think about the Niners, who, watching Trey Lance's second half back, I went, God, he has a long way to go. They paid a premium to get Trey Lance. They paid their 1st-round pick this year and 2 other 1st-round picks to get in that spot. That is a lot. So anything less than Trey Lance being a Pro Bowler, they're in shambles. Well, before, we can nitpick Jimmy Garoppolo all we want. They gave up a 2nd-round pick to get him. Same thing with Sam Darnold in Carolina. They gave up a 2nd-round pick to get him. Now, like Jimmy Garoppolo, his contract is coming up, right? I guess he's in he'd be in year 4. He's got his 5th-year option picked up. Are you going to extend him? How much is it going to cost? Like, there are other variables at play, but their price to acquire him wasn't that expensive. So if he is just a top 15 quarterback, that's a hell of a deal. You can spend money other places right now, and they're doing it. Now, eventually, Sam Darnold, how much they pay him, will judge that moment, and we'll see how he plays the rest of the season. But the Carolina Panthers feel like they're here to stay. Even the Cleveland Browns, think about this. And I thought Jimmy Haslam, I mean, it's not even a thought. Like, everyone agreed. He was not a very good owner. It was not going well in Cleveland. But he could keep buying his way out of these problems. And eventually bought his way out. He bought his way out. He bought his way out. He got Andrew Berry and he got Kevin Stefanski, and they're good. They're fine. But he just kept buying his way out. A lot of these franchises wouldn't have been able to do that, or wouldn't have had the mindset, because they do have the money, to pull the trigger on that. So I think David Tepper, the Carolina Panthers, even if Gilmore doesn't become what he used to be after this injury, I love the mindset. I love the move. And I think the Carolina Panthers are going to be very, very feisty. And their success is really going to be predicated on, can Sam, I don't know if he'll ever quite be a Pro Bowler, but can he be a really good player? Can he be a guy that you view, this guy is like a fringe top 12 quarterback? Because if he is, they're going to be a good team for a while. The other thing, watching the Cardinals play the Dodgers on would have been Wednesday night. Fantastic playoff baseball game. Playoff baseball is incredible. Every pitch matters. Every runner matters. Every base matters. It parallels playoff football, where every yard matters. Every first down, second down, third down matters. Every possession matters. It's very intense. It's just, you're on tilt the entire time. And the Cardinals, who, my Giants have beat 3 times in the playoffs over the last couple of decades. But I just Googled their last 20 years, like what has been their record. And it jumped. I knew they've been good. I mean, they're in the playoffs all the time. They have had 1 losing record in 21 years. One losing record. And I think one of the most underrated things in any business is being consistent. Just every day, every week, every month, just showing up. I've talked about it before. The rule Pat Hill had at Fresno State was just be there. And it's just like, you can pass so many people if you just show up every day, and just be consistent. It doesn't mean you always have to be the best. It doesn't mean, sometimes you're going to be your worst. But if you're just there every day, swinging your pick, answering the bell, things are going to turn out pretty well. Consistency is very, very underrated. I just think in business, and that obviously pro sports is a business. And the St. Louis Cardinals have been one of the most consistent organizations in all of pro sports. They've only won 2 World Series over that time. I think winning championships, it's not overrated, but it's basically impossible to do it a lot. What the Patriots did is abnormal. We're never going to see that again. Hell, the Giants winning 3 World Series in 5 years, that's not going to happen again. Look how good the Dodgers have been for the last decade. They have 1 championship. And it's a little bit of a flawed one because it was the Corona year where they only played 60 regular season games. But I've watched that team for 7-8 years and go, they deserve to be a champion. Like the Atlanta Braves in the 90s. They won every single year. But I think some people go, it's kind of a letdown. I go, the St. Louis Cardinals make a ton of money because every year their consumer, their fan knows we got a chance. And that is a big deal in pro sports. I Googled the Pittsburgh Steelers today. They have also had 1 losing season since 2000. 1 losing season. It's obviously well talked about. Mike Tomlin has never had a season under 500. Like the St. Louis Cardinals, you knew with the Pittsburgh Steelers, if you're a fan, if you're their consumer, every year we got a chance. That doesn't mean you're going to win it. They haven't won a Super Bowl in over a decade. But for the last decade, every year, their fans went in, we're a playoff team, we got a chance, get us to the dance and see what happens. And this year, I think that's ending. And the problem in baseball, where it can be more of a group effort, right? You have a solid pitching staff, you get some scrappy guys late in the order, you get some good bench players, you trade for a couple stars, you can kind of patchwork it together. I mean, the Cardinals lineup probably looks dramatically different this year than it did 4 years ago, than it did 8 years ago. Like, it's constantly changing. Where in football, you have some stalwarts. And the Steelers really have had one main stalwart because the sport is much more predicated on one human being. And Ben has, let's face it, been a huge reason for Mike Tomlin's success. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, they've had good defenses. They've been tough teams. The division, I guess the Bengals have been good. It's been tough. The Ravens have been consistently good. Some of those early Flacco teams, now with Lamar. The Bengals have had good teams with Marvin Lewis. The Browns, for the most part, have sucked. But the Steelers could play with anyone, basically, beside the Patriots. Their problem is, I don't see how they pivot from this. It was obtainable when Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado became available, and the Cardinals, just well-run front office, they go land them both. And those guys are star players. I'm an NL West guy, Giants fan. Probably beside Buster Posey and Clayton Kershaw, those are the best 2 players of the last decade in the division. And they bat 3 and 4 for them now. It's incredible. But it's easier to pull off in baseball. Like, if Paul Goldschmidt, the equivalent in football, at quarterback would be like Kyler Murray's on the block, Joe Burrow's on the block. That doesn't happen. I don't see what the Steelers do. And I've talked about this, and I've had some people DM me like, watch the Liberty quarterback, and someone forwarded me, watch the Pittsburgh quarterback, University of Pittsburgh. I haven't seen either of them play. But just from canvassing the landscape on my own, texting around, I don't think it's a great quarterback draft. And I am not into drafting a quarterback, even let's say the Steelers have a god-awful season, win 5 or 6 years, and basically have their second losing season in 21 years, which is an outlier, right? They are a model of consistency every year in the playoffs. Well, Ben is shot, and it's a quarterback league, and if he can't move around, if he can't push the ball down the field, obviously their offensive line sucks. I'd want to be friends with Mike Tomlin too. In what world, like Green Bay's good. They're going to go back to the playoffs. They're going to have a chance to compete for the NFC. I have a hard time thinking that Rodgers, especially if they break off Devontae Adams, I think Rodgers is going to stay. I don't think he's going to be available. I don't think that's going to be an option. And I'd also say, why would Aaron Rodgers want to go to the Steelers? Why would he want to leave the Packers and go to the Steelers? The Packers are better. Why wouldn't he just want to stay? Now, if he continues to hate Gutekunst and they can't get along, I kind of understand it, but that doesn't really feel like the vibe in Green Bay right now. So it just shows you what they have accomplished is incredible. I have nothing but respect for any organization in any business who every year is just consistent, because they constantly separate from the pack, because it is very, very difficult to do that. It really is. Why do Chiefs fans love Andy so much? Obviously, Patrick Mahomes and winning that Super Bowl was really sweet, but they were kind of a joke franchise. Scott Pioli had ruined it, and then he got there. Immediately they get Alex, and this every year, double-digit wins. Every year we're going to the playoffs. We're not going to win the Super Bowl every year before we even knew who Patrick Mahomes are, but we just have a chance. We're going to be in a playoff game. We're going to play in January. We're going to win a division or two. That feels good. That's really all a fan base wants. There is a short list of fan bases, Alabama, Lakers, Yankees, who really think it's like, Super Bowl or championship or bust. If you are just consistent. The problem for the Steelers, a little bit of a fork in the road. And I just don't really see their options, especially if the quarterback draft is as bad as I think it is right now, because I don't see who's going to be available. What are you going to do? Trade for Jimmy Garoppolo? Jimmy Garoppolo's already injured. He's not even that good. Your offensive line sucks. The options to me are just really limited. So, there's not really a Paul Goldschmidt or a Nolan Arenado for the Pittsburgh Steelers to trade for. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great weekend. And yeah, I'll see everyone a little later. Godspeed, my people.